I was somebody who my entire identity was tied to a title that I could put on myself, a salary that I could claim that I have, a company that I was associated with. Like all of those things were badges that I wore with honor.
From landing job offers just by writing on LinkedIn to building a six-figure side business on social media that surpassed her full-time tech salary, Megan Lieu is challenging the narrative of traditional job security by building her own path and leveraging a personal brand.
I was talking to somebody else about this, about how everybody thinks the 9 to 5 life is stable, but especially in this job market, when companies are doing layoffs left and right, and you could have your job taken from under your nose for so many different reasons, that felt so much less stable to me than betting on myself. When I bet on myself, the only person that's in control there is me. The differential between like how happy I was versus how much money I was making, that gap was growing as I was making more money in my side income. Eventually, I was like, let's stop wondering about the what ifs and just put myself into that scenario. I think it was the best decision of my life.
What is up, and welcome back to The Time I Left My 9 to 5, a podcast where we uncover what really went on behind the scenes of people who took the leap, left behind stability, and built something of their own. I am beyond excited for today's episode because I'm chatting with Megan Lieu. She's a former data scientist turned full-time content creator with over 250,000 followers on LinkedIn and Instagram. But honestly, this episode isn't just about Megan's rise to success and how she built up her social media empire. A few months ago, when I stumbled onto her content and became completely obsessed with how she's reshaped the narrative of job security. We also got real about something I think a lot of people overlook when they're considering leaving their 9 to 5, which is how you're not just walking away from your salary and your job title, but also from a part of your identity. I know I personally struggled with answering the "so what do you do for a living" question after leaving my full-time data scientist job. Megan opened up about this shift and how it feels to let go of something that you've worked so hard for years and something your parents are proud of, and the sense of stability it brings. Before we jump into the episode, I'll be so grateful if you could subscribe to the channel if you're watching on YouTube, or rate the podcast if you're listening everywhere else. Your support truly means the world as I continue to grow this podcast and bring you more unfiltered, real conversations just like this one. Thank you so much, Megan, for joining us today on the podcast.
I am super excited to be here in your town.
So the first question that I ask everybody on the podcast is, how do you feel about leaving your 9 to 5? On a scale of 0 to 10, how much do you regret at this point in time? 10 being completely regret and 0 being the best decision of your life.
If I could say a negative number, as in I think it was the best decision of my life, then I would say that, because in the moment when I did leave my job, I think everything aligned to point me towards this path. And now being 7 months into the post-corporate life, I am realizing now that everything just fell into place and it was what I was meant to do. So I don't regret it at all.
Awesome. That's great to hear. Before we dive into your story, can you give us a quick overview of your journey to this point?
I started in the data analytics field. That was probably 3 years ago. And I was very involved in the startup world. I was a data analyst and then a data scientist and then a developer advocate at early stage startups and smaller companies, which was that choice to go into smaller companies was great for my career path leading up to the point before I left corporate world, because I was able to grow my skill sets, network, and take on a lot of different roles that really helped me shape my corporate experience in a very short period of time, because I was at smaller companies where there was like less bureaucracy, less corporate politics and things like that. So I am very happy that I chose that path of going into the tech startup world and learning a lot of skills there. When I left my 9 to 5 job, I was a developer advocate at a data science startup. And so I had left back in April this year, but prior to that, I had been in the corporate world for about 5 years.
Wow, there's so much we can unpack here. Let's start with the moment that you realized you had to leave your job, or the moment that you realized like your side hustle could become a full-time thing. So you have built an incredible 150,000 followers on LinkedIn, 100,000 followers on Instagram. And it seems like your side hustle has put you into a unique position to make that decision. So was there like a distinct moment that you realized corporate maybe wasn't for you at this point in time?
It wasn't one specific moment, but leading up to the point when I left that job, there were a lot of moments where I was resenting my corporate job because I was always thinking about the alternative, which was working for myself. And at that time, my side business as a content creator was rapidly growing. And so that, what's the word? What's the word for alternative? You can edit this out. So the alternative was like the differential between like how happy I was versus how much money I was making was that gap was growing as I was making more money in my side income. And so the more I was making in that side income, the more I was like, why am I wasting my time at a place that is making me unhappy every day and that is making me wish that it kept me wondering about like the what ifs. And so eventually I was like, let's stop wondering about the what ifs and just put myself in that into that scenario. And also I had mentioned that there were a lot of things that aligned that made me realize it was the right decision. I was also very burnt out. I was dealing with a very not great manager. There were a lot of like cultural differences, principal differences between me and my employer. And it wasn't just like something that was pulling me away from that job. There were also a lot of push factors too. And so it just made sense to take the leap.
Okay, so you talked about opportunity cost.
Opportunity.
Opportunity cost being one of the main factors. Like, if you could put more all of your time into your side hustle, imagine how big it could, like what kind of thing it would become, as well as what you're experiencing burnout, which we'll talk about at your workplace. Was there any other factor that come into play when you're thinking about leaving behind a stable paycheck and jumping into the entrepreneurship world?
Yeah, I don't think I've ever thought of myself as an entrepreneurial person. I had always thought that I would prefer the stable life because I'm very much a creature of habit. If you had asked me maybe a year or two ago, I would have been like, no, why would I ditch something that's cushy and familiar for something that is there? It's so unknown. Like the future is so unknown. But I had spoken to a friend who recently had made the same leap as I had. She did it like a couple months prior to when I did it. And we were talking. She's like, what's holding you back? And I was like, but what if I fail? What if I make $0 from taking a bet on myself? And she's, do you really believe that you would let yourself fail? Would you ever allow yourself to flop? And I was like, no, you're right. I was talking to somebody else about this, about how everybody thinks the 9 to 5 life is stable, but especially in this job market, when companies are doing layoffs left and right, and you could have your job taken from under your nose for so many different reasons, that felt so much less stable to me than betting on myself. And when I bet on myself, the only person that's in control there is me. And that felt more certain for me because I knew that I would do everything in my power to be able to make a living off of that. And so I was like, yeah, I'm going to take a bet on myself because it's just more certain. Maybe when the economy improves, maybe that'll be different. But for now, I'm just like, I'm so sure of myself.
Yeah, I love that. And did you have a timeline in mind when you were thinking about like how long you're going to be out of 9 to 5 for?
I knew that at that last job, it was a ticking time bomb. I had told myself that when I got in there, my goal was to make it a year in the company. And slowly, as I started getting more burned, that timeline started decreasing. And I was like, okay, we're going to last 9 months. Okay, we're going to last 6 months. I lasted 7 months in that job. So I was like, okay, at least I've gotten past that 6 month mark. And once I did, I was like, I can't handle this anymore. And it, again, like a lot of factors aligned to where my boss was like, your performance needs improvement because that was when I was in the thick of being so jaded in that 9 to 5 job. It lined up with me getting being put on a performance improvement plan. I was like, you know what? I don't need this. This is a sign from above that like I was not meant to be here. And I was like, I'm not going to take your performance improvement plan. I'm actually just going to leave. There's a lot of drama in that moment, but I was like, yeah, it's time to go.
That is so empowering. And that couldn't have happened unless you already built your personal brand on LinkedIn and social media.
I agree.
I think we should unpack more about what happened at your last job because I think there are two big factors here that drove you to leave. It's your job and the alternative that you're talking about. So you mentioned when you realized that this job wasn't what you expected, how did you navigate through that emotional and professional toll that it took on you?
Yeah. One way I coped was by taking on more work. It sounds so counterintuitive, but I was like, if I drown myself in the job, then maybe I will perform better and I won't have these like performance issues. I'll also distract myself from how unhappy I was at the job. I remember leading up to when I left that job, I had been on like 3 business trips back to back,
Wow.
one of which was to Europe to see my coworkers, and so it was the perfect storm. I was just so physically burnt out, but that was because of my doing, because I was just like, "You know what? If I just work harder, if I kind of brute force it and push against this wall even harder, then maybe I can break through the burnout." And a lot of people, I think that too, where it's, "Okay, let me fight this fire with even more fire," and then it just leads to an explosion, which is what happened with me, and so, looking back, maybe I could have coped with it a little bit better, maybe spoken to a therapist or something on how to cope with it, but yeah, there were definitely some errors on my part leading up to that moment.
It's definitely lessons that we can all learn from. Were there any signs of your burnout initially? Like I know burnout is just so common these days and I don't feel like we talk about it enough. So can you talk us through the entire, like what were the signs that for you that you were burnt out? And now that you are on the other side, what advice would you give someone who is currently going through that?
Yeah, those signs you don't notice until after you're out of it, and now there were so many signs. There were physical signs, right? I couldn't sleep. I had insomnia every night because of the anxiety of waking up to messages because my coworkers were all in European time zone. So like I would be woken up to a barrage of messages and me having to catch up. Like just thinking about that every night, like I couldn't sleep. I stopped going to the gym, which historically has been an outlet for me for many years, and I just quit that cold turkey because I didn't have time. Relationship-wise, I was so cranky, especially, like, when my partner would get off of work is when I was still working, and so we would never have time to spend together, and I was super cranky. And just emotionally, the consequences there were that I just felt like a shell of a human, and I just kept crying for no reason, and I was like, "I feel like something has to give here," but when you're in that scenario, you're just like, "There's no way," and so it's that hopelessness, that's another kind of emotional impact of burnout.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. I felt like when I was leaving my job as well, it was like month of just crying.
Yeah.
It's super scary because
Mhm.
you're taking a step towards the unknown
Yeah.
and you literally don't know what's going to happen. But one thing that I think I did know was that I was going to lose a part of me, a part of my identity.
Mhm.
It's like when you are at parties, you'd be like, "Oh, what do you do for work?" That's usually
Mhm.
like the first thing that people talk about. So, what do I do for work after I leave my 9 to 5? So,
Yeah.
how did you manage that identity loss?
Yeah, I was somebody who my entire identity was tied to a title that I could put on myself, a salary that I could claim that I have, a like a company that I was associated with. Like all of those things were badges that I wore with honor. Prior to me leaving this job, I was actually laid off from the prior job. And so I had experienced losing those things for a scenario that was out of my control. And so I had practice with knowing how to lose an identity, and following that layoff, I was so desperate to regain those things back. And once I did, I was like, this having these things, the title, the company, the salary, none of that is worth it if I'm unhappy and if I like don't even know what the next day holds for me. And so I was like, this time I was like, I want to be in the driver's seat when I figure out who I am outside of those things rather than somebody taking that away from me. I'm like, "No, now I have the power." And it being in the driver's seat, I decide that I am more than these things.
Yeah, I love that. So, what did you do immediately after you quit? The first day, first week, what did you do?
I booked a very impromptu trip with our friend Jess to Miami, and we just lived it up.
Love that.
It was the first real vacation I had in years. All of my previous companies have had unlimited PTO, and because of that, I never took any of that PTO. I was just always working, and I was like, "Oh yeah, I can just take it at a later date." And now I was like, "No, there's no excuse to not just rest, completely unplug." And it was such a much needed trip to be like, "Oh wait, like this is how I be a normal human. This is how I reset."
Just backtrack a little bit because you did mention unlimited PTO.
Mm.
Why did you feel like you weren't able to take them? Was that the norm in your experience?
I believe that part of that has to do with my personality. If I am used to a routine, I will go into that and put blinders onto that a certain goal and not realize that I'm neglecting certain things like my physical, mental health and being. And so I think I've always had coworkers who they do take off and they do take advantage of their PTO. And I always just thought, no, I should work harder than those people, and maybe you'll get rewarded for that. Like, me not taking PTO, I think that's a good thing. I think so. Even though literally I was working at a European company where people take Europeans, they vacation hard, and I had coworkers who were out for 2 months for Christmas into New Year's, and I'd be like, "Where are they?" And I was like, "Wait, why?" After I left the company, I was like, "Why am I not following suit if they can
Hmm.
do it?" Right? I think a lot of it was that at that company, I was the only female, and I believe that I held myself to different standards, and I think my coworkers held me to different standards as well. I was the only one of a lot of different things. I was the only woman, I was the only American, I was the only one working in the US, and so there were a lot of, I think, standards that I held myself to that I was like, "No, that's them. That's what my coworkers like to do, and then there's me. I'm a new joiner. I'm the only woman in the company. I feel like I have to work harder."
If you were to do it again, would you put yourself in the same situation or would you do things differently?
It's easy to look back and say that I would do things differently. I don't know if I were put in that situation again where there were a lot of toxic things about that company, like, also me being the only person on my team, like, I was a one-woman team.
Mhm.
If you had put me in that situation again, I would justify me not taking PTO as, "Okay, who else is gonna get the work done if I'm out?" So, I think there were a lot of other factors leading to me having not taken my PTO, but at the end of the day, I made a lot of excuses for myself, and I would hope that if ever back in the corporate world, I would know to prioritize my mental health better.
Love that. It's quite a journey, and now that's all behind you.
Mhm.
Let's move on to your own thing.
Mm.
That is very empowering. You're doing a very good job at building your own thing. And I'm sure a lot of people listening today are also interested in building their own personal brands. So, how did you first start out building your personal brand on LinkedIn? And what advice would you give someone who is just starting out as well?
I believe nobody starts out being like, "Oh, I'm gonna put myself out there for the sole reason of building a personal brand, or for the sole reason of gaining a lot of followers, or for the sole reason of," yes, like, there are founders who already had a business or whatever, and they wanna market themselves, but I think for the average individual, I did not start off with any product or service to sell. I had started because I felt lost in my career. I wanted to share the thoughts of being somebody who felt lost in her career. I just wanted an outlet to share what I was going through, share from the lesson I was learning, the experiences I had as somebody who came from a non-tech background and was transitioning into data analytics and data science. And along the way, a lot of people resonated with that because they were in the same boat in their career. And as more people started following me and telling me that they resonated with that experience, I was like, oh, this is all coagulating into my personal brand. I was like, okay, maybe I have something here. So what I'm saying is I never started my personal brand as a very intentional effort. It came through trial and error. But what my hope is that I can advocate building your personal brand to other people more intentionally, because after learning through trial and error, I've realized the benefits of doing that. And so my hope is that other people don't have to go through that same trial and error to realize the benefits.
Mhm. Would you say that you started out like sharing your own personal story more so than trying to teach others? And that's how people felt like they related to you so much?
Yeah, then you've nailed it on the head. And it's what I tell people that I coach and mentor all the time, which is, especially on LinkedIn, I don't think that going the inspirational route I think it's just so cringe. I don't know. Like, maybe if you were actually like a CEO,
Mm.
if you are Bill Gates or something, then yeah, you have plenty of stories that you can go inspire people with. But for your average person, being relatable goes so much further than trying to shove inspirational quotes down their throat. And that's how it always started, is just speaking at a very relatable and personal level just about my own experiences. I never spoke about anything that I didn't know about. And people, I think that attracted a lot more attention because people could relate. The relatability is so underrated.
Yeah, and I feel like I had the same, like it's like imposter syndrome too. It's like we're so
Yeah.
young, we're in our 20s, but really your audience is just someone who is one step behind you, someone who wants to break into data, someone who wants to quit their job. That's what you have experience on that other people don't, and they can
Yeah.
learn from you. To relate it back to your corporate experience, when you're working as an entrepreneur for yourself, there is so much that you have to do, if not more, a lot more than what you're assigned to in corporate. What strategies do you develop from your corporate burnout experience to make sure that you
Mhm.
don't burn out now in your own business?
I have to be transparent. I'm still figuring that out. I wish I could say that once I quit corporate, I was just the best manager of myself ever. And I would just wake up at 7 a.m. every day. And now I go to the gym in the mornings and I get all my shit done before 5 p.m. I don't. The reality for me is that for the first 6 months, I was very forgiving of myself and being like, okay, you're recovering from burnout. And so you should take it easy. And I did. And that definitely unwound that burnout. And it was very necessary work that I had to do. But the slippery slope there is that you end up just some days not getting work done and realizing that being a manager of yourself is a skill. I've never been a manager of anybody. Having to manage myself, and I'm realizing that I'm sometimes not a great employee. That is a skill that I have to learn how to do, but I am very patient with myself now. But along the way, like past the 6 month mark, I was like, okay, let's implement some structure into my life and kind of replicate that 9 to 5 job, or else nothing's going to get done.
Now look at your like traveling, going to conferences, speaking, brand deal partnerships. You've really made something out of your personal brand and you're able to support you and your family and yourself like with that lifestyle.
Mhm.
So what was your like initial step in monetizing your brand first of all and how did you get those brand deal? How did you monetize your brand?
I started my brand on LinkedIn. At the time, LinkedIn was the only platform I had. And it coincided with a time when a lot of more brands are starting to experiment with influencer marketing on LinkedIn. I remember it was summer of last year when companies started reaching out and they were reaching out with maybe like $300, $500 deals. And I was like, wow, that's awesome. And I was like, yeah, you're going to pay me for a single post. That's crazy. And that started around summer. And then as more and more companies started to experiment with that route of that route of working with influencers on LinkedIn, I gained more experience there. It got to a point where I was like, I feel like I should expand my platform to Instagram because I want to land bigger deals. I just want that as a point of leverage. So I decided to go onto Instagram almost exactly a year ago today, and not thinking that it would lead to anything at all. But around maybe like February, March, I had my Instagram for a couple months at that point. Brands started reaching out there, and I realize now that Instagram is such a tried and true platform for companies who want to work with influencers. So the quantity of companies that reach out from Instagram started surpassing the number of companies that were working with me on LinkedIn. And at that point, when the Instagram company started reaching out to work with me, I had some experience working with LinkedIn companies and slowly started combining those two. And summer of this year, it really started picking up as my following on both of the platforms grew.
Yeah, I just saw you just passed 100,000 on Instagram. Congratulations.
Thank you. Maggie and I were literally together when it happened. I was like, guys, it happened.
Within a year, that's like very impressive, especially given today, like the platform's so saturated.
I will say, a lot of people are like, wow, that's so impressive. I don't know. Because I quit my job, like I didn't have a 9 to 5 job, so I could just focus on creating content, not to discount my own wins or anything, but like now my job is a content creator. So that was my focus, was to pump out content to reach that number. And I think a lot of people, they have a lot of other obligations in their life, like 9 to 5 job. children, other demanding things in their life. And I was just able to brute force it to get to
Yeah, it's a
100K.
lot of hard work. Like, it's not just luck, it's hard work.
The amount of time that I spend per day creating reels, I'm just like, oh, here we go again. It's definitely hard work.
I can attest to that. When we were walking earlier and Megan was just taking videos of everything. Everything is content. So now that you're a full-time content creator, influencer, I don't really like the term influencer.
I use content creator.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Content creator.
Thought leader, maybe.
I love that. How do you stay authentic while still catering to your audience of 250,000 people across platform? Who are your audience these days?
My audience on Instagram versus LinkedIn is a little different. LinkedIn, I speak more to professionals who are mid-career and beyond, whereas Instagram, I speak more to aspiring tech professionals who are just starting out their careers. But no matter the platform, I think being open and transparent about the struggles that I'm dealing with is something I will always stay consistent with, because it goes back to that relatability factor, right? I don't know how to speak to people in a way that's not authentic, because I don't know how to create content around that. Like, I'm just so used to just talking through the things that I'm actually going through on a day-to-day basis. And I got those reps in from doing that on LinkedIn, just being very like, hey, this is me. I'm not trying to oversell myself as something I'm not. And going through both the ups and downs of my career, I got practice of doing that on LinkedIn. And so I just transferred that easily over to Instagram. And I found that a lot of people could resonate, especially with job search struggles and finding your way through your career. That's just such a universal topic. And so it is only beneficial to be as open and honest about it as possible.
Yeah. And what has been the most rewarding part of your building your own career path so far? And what impact do you hope to make looking forward in the next couple of years, I don't know, next year or so as you're doing this?
Yeah, it's the experiences. I this year have been able to travel to 5 or 6 different cities since quitting my job 7 years ago. And
7 months ago.
7 months ago. What
Yeah.
did I say? 7 years
7 years
ago?
ago.
7 months ago. I've gone to parts of the world that I never would have been able to prior to that. And then also it's the people that I meet along the way. Like, Maggie and I could not have been sitting here together if I didn't take the time to invest in my Instagram
Yes.
account. And that's where we met each other. And sitting here in Maggie's apartment, I don't think that would have been possible if I'm working a 9 to 5 job right now. It's opened up my eyes to the fact that there's just so much more life to live outside of my little bubble and outside of me turning on my laptop and answering my boss's Slack messages, right? There's
Yeah.
just so much more that goes on outside of my small circle. And I feel like my perspective has really broadened this year to realize how small I am, but how big that impact could be just by putting yourself out there.
Yeah, I can attest to the incredible people that you meet
Mhm.
being content creator. And also, I remember like when I first ventured out, I felt like I couldn't really talk about my struggle with anybody, with my existing friends, because they still have their 9 to 5,
It's true, yeah.
right? But you're still friends on like different levels. You're just like, there's certain things you can't talk about because you don't have the same life experience.
Yeah.
And that's when you start venture out and meet other people
find
who
other
are
people
like
who can
you.
relate to that.
Yeah, and have
Yeah.
that support network like you and Jess, which everybody knows about.
Yeah, that's another thing about expanding my horizons. It's like I've met different circles of people for different areas of my life. Of course, I have my good friends that I relate to them on a day-to-day level, but on the content creation side and business side, I have different friends for that too. And it's so awesome to branch out, like to find different realms of yourself and build your circle around like those different extensions of yourself.
Yeah, it could be so much more than just like one identity. We can be
Yeah,
like a
it's multiple
well-rounded. Yeah,
identities. Yeah.
exactly. So what is next for you? Is there any exciting projects, plans on the horizon people should know about?
You and I were talking about this the other day. You are somebody who's always like multiple steps ahead. You're always thinking what's next. I don't want to call myself short-sighted, but I'm just like, I always take it day by day. So I honestly am living my dream. Like, I'm so happy with
Living in the
where
moment?
I'm at. And so yeah, I'm able to live in the moment a lot more. And because of that, I'm like, yeah, I feel like I am just going to continue on this route and just work even harder to build my business, maybe hire people onto my team, maybe expand on my platforms. maybe launch a course or something like that. But I see myself doing this for the foreseeable future. I just want it bigger and better. So I'm just gonna like work even harder. I don't
Mhm.
think that my life is gonna look too different from this. I say that now. The
Which in
next
a year,
she's
Megan
gonna be
Megan Star.
yeah, so I don't know, I just take it day by day. I think I'm incapable of planning too far out in advance.
Love being in the present.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing your story with us. Just to wrap this up, I know you make a six-figure income off of social media. I've heard statistics that like being a YouTuber is the number one, like most wanted job now in elementary school, like when they're getting surveyed. So for the young people out there, for the
Mm.
listener out there today who might want to also build their personal brand and be able to monetize and eventually quit their job for it, what advice would you give them?
My advice here is to not underestimate the skill of communication, right? Like all of this is communication. And along those lines, I think there are a lot of people like me. I would consider myself an introvert. And I think being communicative and being an introvert, those are not mutually exclusive. I think being an introvert is an advantage in some ways. So I think if you had asked me a couple years ago, I would have said, "Oh, I'm an introvert. I can't do any of this stuff. Like I can't go talk on stages. I can't put myself out there. I can't have an Instagram or YouTube channel. Like why would I do that? I'm an introvert, right?" But realizing that you can that's something you can work on. Like those communication skills, especially as an introvert, you have a lot of advantages such as being more thoughtful with how you put yourself out in the world, like more thoughtful with the words and the thoughts that you share with the world. So don't discount yourself if you are maybe somebody who's a little bit shyer, more reserved. Like you have a lot of other skills and advantages that you can offer to this world. It's just all about trusting in yourself and believing in yourself to put yourself out there with conviction.
I love that. And with that, we'll end on this note. Thank you so much, Megan, for joining us today.
Thank you, Maggie.